Good afternoon. Welcome to this special council meeting of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan on Thursday, January 25th, 2024. We'll call the meeting to order at 1 p.m. and this is our special budget meeting to discuss the second draft of the budget before us today. We'll begin the meeting with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Cavan-Monaghan is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe people. We offer our gratitude to First Nations for their care for and teachings about these lands. May we honor these teachings. I'll look to council for approval of the agenda before us today, moved by Councillor Byrne and seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there is no closed session, so we'll begin with the presentation from the Cavan-Monaghan Public Library Board. Carla Buckborough will be presenting. Carla, welcome.
Next slide. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today. I am here to give you a quick end-of-year update on the library and to answer any questions you have about our budget. This slide shows the vision, mission, and guiding values the board has created with our strategic plan. The board is finalizing the deliverables and measurements that move our strategic plan from paper to action. Once complete, we will be coming back to council to present the final version. That was the big focus of our January meeting, and we will be doing that again at our February meeting. So I will hopefully be coming back in early spring with the update on our strategic plan. Next slide. We are really seeing a return to pre-COVID activity levels. 4,200 people participated in our events in 2023, up from 2,700 in 2022, a 53% increase last year over this year. I went back through 10 decades of data. We have welcomed more card holders, more patrons in 2023 than we have in any year before, with 374 people getting cards this year. Our patrons borrowed almost 50,000 items. That's both from our physical collection as well as our virtual library, our ebooks. That is 2,000 more than what we circulated in 2019. Next slide, please. This one shows the circulation from 2019 through to 2023, and you can see how this year we managed to surpass where we were in 2019. It's wonderful to see people coming back to the library and using our resources. Next slide. This one is for interest. Every year, libraries have to provide data to the Ministry of Culture, Tourism, and Sport Industry from our financials and our activities. How do we compare? While no two library systems are managed the same way, we can make some comparisons based on population and funds provided by the municipality. For this slide, I took 7 libraries, the Cavan-Monaghan being in the middle, 3 on each side of it. And I just show you where, using the old population data, because that's what was used in the 2022 annual survey, where we rate based on funds from our municipality. The funds from the municipality include all funding, such as circulating materials and allocated expenses. So the other parts that Kimberly puts into our budget, the insurance, the audit, those numbers go into that. It does not include large capital or building projects or development charges. I just thought it was an interesting piece of data to show. Comparisons can't be run yet for 2023 data because the annual survey has just opened yesterday for us to start inputting our information and will only be released to the public in mid-2024. If I've done my numbers correctly, it looks like we did an increase on our cost per capita last year up to $35.15. It'll be interesting to see how we compare with other libraries. Next slide. The library's operating levy has been reduced slightly since our first submission. We are asking for a 4.53% increase. The difference is that we have moved ebooks from operating to capital. The surplus in our operating looks larger than it is because of the seniors grant that runs on the April to March fiscal year. So these amounts will be rolled forward. I don't want to make any guesses on what our actual non-seniors grant surplus is until I've had our audit done. Next slide. For the capital budget, we put the development charges as well as the levy in here. From submission 1 to submission 2, the development charges has gone up by $1,500 to $6,500. And we have lowered the levy request for IT. We had asked for a new $7,000, but because we didn't spend the 2023 $7,000, we're rolling that forward while the library board puts together a technology plan and a way to spend that money in a very thoughtful method. Next slide. We do have a small surplus in our circulating materials budget of about $3,300. The board is recommending that the unspent capital funds from the circulating materials budget be allocated towards the proposed shade structure at the old Millbrook School. As potential users of the space, we want to demonstrate our commitment to it. Next. When it comes to development charges, because when I presented in December, that was left sort of as a blank. I have discovered that when it comes to determining growth, if you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers, not so much on the determining growth, but how to pull from the development charges. Is it growth in the population of the municipality? Is it growth in the circulation or growth in the collection size, or a combination of all three? We've chosen for this year to be conservative in our request for development charges. We are asking for less than the value of one new item per resident using the rate of $32 per item, as evidenced in that 10-year chart that is taken from the library DC worksheet. The other half shows how many books have been added to the collection, because there's some question as to whether additions and deletions, and then the remainder, the difference is that the growth that we are supposed to be funding. So there's still some work to be done on development charges. Thanks to the Finance Committee, we have done quite a bit so far looking into it, but we're still trying to get a firm footing so that we have a good foundation for that. Last one. As our numbers show from the third slide, we have, in 2023, we have grown. We have more new card holders, we have circulated more materials, and we have had more people participate in our events. I hope you see the value in the library system that we have created and will help us keep it growing in 2024. I don't know if you need me to go through the rest of the report, the other 3 pages, or how you'd like to proceed.
I'll look to council, but thanks for that presentation. I think it was very thorough, and I think council can ask questions if there's any with regards to the report without you going through it. Carly provided it ahead of time, so we've had this document for a while, but thank you for that summation. One thing I will add, just because it's a recent development, I know that Selwyn Township, many of us were at the Roma conference this weekend. They had a delegation with one of the ministers with regards to libraries, and they were talking about increasing or lobbying for additional funding or more consistent funding for libraries, especially in rural communities, which is really the meat of the Roma conference. And one of the things that I asked that they bring up in that delegation with the minister as well was clarity with regards to DCs, because there's no rule book, and with regards to libraries, it's still, municipalities are getting a handle on it. It's changed 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years for municipalities, but with the libraries, we want to make sure that we're doing it appropriately, and there's really no clarity with how to do it, how they intend it to be done. So hopefully they get some answers back, but I know that there's an example of the county going to bat for the libraries and advocating for more funding and more clarity where possible. So I just wanted to share that with you because it was hot off the presses. Other questions for members of council with regards to the library presentation? I don't see any. The only thing is I will say thank you for the contribution of the rollover towards the shade structure. I think that's a great gesture. And hopefully that structure will be supported moving forward. And I think I'm pretty optimistic it will, because we know there's a need for the programming and the utilization of the space. So thanks for that. With no questions, we can look for a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. Councillor Natshaw and Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you for that, Carla, very much. And we'll look forward to the further discussions. All right, moving on to 7.1 of the agenda is the draft budget presentation report. There was two, I believe, date inaccuracies in the report, sorry. I think there were years that were inaccurate, and those have been reflected or corrected in the draft report before us, and they will be corrected in the agenda that's online as well. So what we need is a motion that council support adding the revised report before us today. Councillor Natshaw, Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. And with that formality out of the way, Ms. Pope, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. Just in noting that when we get to those sections where the actual years are misquoted as 2022 and should be referencing 2023, or the opposite, 2023 referencing 2022, I will highlight that for you and for the public. I know we've circulated that internally, but just so everyone is aware. So this report, council, is coming back to you after the first meeting. The first meeting, we noted that there was a direction of council to further reduce the budget, to come back with a revised 2024 budget with opportunities to reduce the levy increase to below 4%. So all the decisions within here are trying to adhere to that motion and bring back to you a second draft for your review and consideration before we move forward to the final draft to be approved in February. So I'm going to highlight for you the various changes in the overview. These are the items that were listed on between pages 1 and 2, just to speak about the changes that occurred since the last discussion. In this particular draft, we are recommending a consolidated 3.9% municipal tax rate in order to fund what you currently see before you today, pending approval of council. There are two public meetings today, the one at 1 o'clock, which we are in to update council, provide opportunity to discuss with the management team, etc. However, this evening's meeting at 6 p.m. is open to the public, and so they are able to come and speak to us, to council, and we want to make sure that that information is readily available for them to review. The second draft budget, therefore, has a consolidated decrease of $469,915. It includes across the board $45,000 of a decrease in the operating budget amongst all the different departments. As you know, each time we bring forward the budget, there are actuals that are being posted in between those periods of time. So in first draft, you had everything up to October. Second draft, you have everything posted up to November. We've been receiving the December invoices and they'll all be posted. Some of them have been, but there'll be more posted between now and final so that your actuals do change. And as they change, when we can identify opportunities for saving in the operating budget, we definitely apply those. So that $45,000 increase there is in relation to some of those savings adjusted numbers and quotes being updated since the last draft. In addition to that, at the last meeting, per council motion, to remove the bell restoration and porch light projects, that reduced the budget by $13,000. The hardware replacement program, when we looked at the number of items that we had budgeted and the amount of the rollover, we determined that we didn't require new funds from the municipality this year in the tax rate. We could use what we already had. So therefore, we were able to remove that additional ask we had in first draft for $5,200 and brought that down. The SCBA replacements were completed. The fire chief identified that they were completed in 2023 and the invoices have all been submitted. Therefore, we recognize that we don't need those funds for next year. So therefore, that $27,000 was reduced. In order to meet the 4% or less motion, I have included in this draft $167,250 reduction in the transfer to the asset replacement reserve. That is just to get to that number. We can talk about that in more detail, and that is definitely along with many other things in the budget, but up for consideration of council. The 2023 rollover for pre-engineering, we did receive some additional invoices in the interim, and therefore our rollover wasn't as large as we first anticipated. So we had to increase that back up to cover that. So that was $2,392. We did receive an updated quote to complete the AMP regulation requirements, and we needed an additional $8,000, so that's included in this budget. There are updated quotations for the Public Works Operations Center, including the generator, fuel system, and monitoring system. So that did increase our budget by the $87,000. The sign reflectivity estimates came in at $1,500 additional. We did receive notice of the Canada Community Building Fund in the 2024 allocation, and therefore we could reduce the projects that were originally in first draft, being the slurry seal and surface treatment programs. So if you look at those two on the capital budget, you'll notice that we were able to reduce our ask by that $311,394, which is also included in this budget. And then there was a project for Lisa Court that had been discussed at the management, the budget committee level and with management. However, due to funding, we did not proceed and put that forward in our first draft. When we received the OCIF 2024 allocation of $369,637, we were able then to pull those funds to offset the township portion of Lisa Court. You'll note that Lisa Court appears under water and wastewater as well. That's covered under the reserve. So we've been able to add that project into this second draft budget without increasing the tax rate. So that's why it says net zero, because we were able to fund it through those two programs. So just as a summary recap, when we brought forward the first estimates during discussion amongst the budget committee, we were at 14%. It was reduced down through negotiations and discussions in staff to 7.9% that you saw in the first draft. And then again, now for this draft to come in below the 4%, we're at 3.9 in this draft for further consideration of council. Approximately 1% of every municipal residential tax rate increase equals an additional $111,300 in revenue. As you know, in first draft, we do not have the final roll totals at that time, and therefore it is estimated. This draft includes the actual roll totals, and that's where some of that adjustment is. So previously we had reported an estimate that it would have been $111,500. I'm just noting here for you to know it's actually $111,300 because we have received the final roll total. The tax levy comparison that's provided to council each year provides the last 5 years as a comparator. If council were to proceed with the 3.9% in the 2024 draft, we have indicated there the comparison year over year of what's happened over the last 5 years here at this municipality. 1% municipal tax levy increase will equal a property tax increase of $6.97 per 100,000 of current value assessment. As we know, homes are not 100,000, reminding council that we are still using the phase-in rates as per legislation, which are the 2016 CVA rates. So therefore, that is why the average median impact value of homes in our community, although we know what they sell greater than 400,000, that's just a median right now, and it's based on current value assessment, which is those 2016 values. So if we want to look at it from that perspective, the increase of 1% would mean that a home that's valued at 400,000 with MPAC would experience a $27.89 increase with every 1% increase in our budget. The MPAC provincial assessment update, I reported on this last year. They've held the same numbers this year. So this information actually has not changed, but it's good to just stop here and revisit it, because sometimes when residents are inquiring about their current value assessments, there's confusion when they talk about someone new purchasing in the community, what they pay for their home, be it $1,800,000, whatever it is, and the assumption, an incorrect assumption, that they just take that value and multiply it by our tax rate. That's not correct. Every single property in our municipality continues to be valued at the 2016 value according to MPAC. When we all move to our new values, we will move at the same time. There won't be that unfair advantage where one is being assessed at a current value assessment that's current and one that's 2016. We're all holding together at 2016. This is outside of the municipality's hands. We have to await the Ontario government to announce that we're moving forward and what that next phase-in looks like. So just as a reminder, if there are any questions about phase-in, everyone is still at the 2016 phase-in rates for the valuation of their property. Next, please. please. The operating budget. I'll just pause here for a moment. This is a summary sheet to show each department and the changes between the budget last year and the budget this year. As a consolidated net change, we're looking at about a 6.3% change amongst all our departments together. However, individually, there are increases, as you can see there, and decreases. Just to note, this does not necessarily equal increased costs. Sometimes it can be changes in the way that we're delivering services, changes in quotes, some reductions in other locations, and some increases. So this is just an overall per department, and there's often an explanation behind each, and that is why management is here to address those concerns and try to answer those questions in more detail for you today. As per the first draft, it has not changed, but the union collective agreements are still in place over the 3-year term from 2023. Sorry. Wasn't a 3-year term, sorry. I forget the term at this point, but we're still in that term for 2024, and it has not changed. The consumer price index has risen 4%. In the reporting period, 12 months from August to August, and therefore the September notice is what this municipality uses on an annual basis for our budget. It is included here. And the construction price index rose 6.6%. That's according to the last quarter annually. In comparison, that has been applied to our development charges, which is also included in this report. In the departmental summary, this is a summary of the changes that happen across the board. So rather than repeating them over and over again as we hit each department, we summarize them here up top, and I'll just quickly summarize them. Each year, we have the source deductions that are legislative requirements that we must submit, and therefore the 2024 source deductions have been applied within this budget. The OMERS eligibility has changed last year, where there wasn't a requirement to have a 2-year 700-hour period of time before you could access OMERS, and therefore it's actually voluntary right from the get-go, whether you are full-time or part-time. That changed last year. So that continues to be within our budget and outside of our control. The indexing I just spoke about, the CPI, that is included as per our bylaw. Where we know better, the hydro gas fuel actuals that are coming in, as I mentioned, we have revised some of those. They'll continue to be revised until the final budget, including VoIP and any internal allocations. As a reminder, the debentures and estimates that are included for our capital works projects, there has to be a report come forward to council before we enter into an agreement with Infrastructure Ontario on the actual debentures that is coming in 2024 once the projects are completed. And it'll be at that time that we sign the bylaws and the actuals will be placed in. So at this point, we have holders in the same value as last year to ensure that we are setting aside funds within the municipal tax rate. I'll just continue through the budget report and skip a little bit over each of these sections because each department head is here to discuss as we get into operating rather than rereading all those individual bullet points. We'll continue on. The environmental tax rate, continue, yep. Perfect. Actually, if we could just back up a little bit, if we could go up above to Millbrook BIA. There we go. Thank you. So one change that happened between the last meeting at the first draft and our second meeting today is on January 9th, there was an annual general meeting of the BIA, and they brought forward an increased levy of 16,000 requested, which is included here, and that's a change from of about $1,681.90. So that is new and included in here as well. And then further down, we have environmental tax rate and the water and wastewater budgets. The environmental tax rates, there might be some confusion, and we can talk about that when we go into the operating budget for the water and wastewater, but the actual tax levy is what we need to fund the budget after we've applied all revenues. And because there are some additional revenues coming in there, we don't necessarily need as much because of some of those areas, and we can talk about them in more detail. But that's why there's an operational increase, but an overall decrease when it comes to the actual tax rate, just two separate components. And a reminder that water and wastewater is funded through the user fees. The budget actually adheres to the user fees. This is not a newer approval asking for anything different than what's already been included in the user fees, and adheres to that. As we move forward into capital, we have a net capital expenditure this year of $3.9 million. And the actual detail of that is on the capital page. We'll go through that momentarily with each department. This has been updated to include all those bullet points at the beginning when we spoke about the changes in the capital program to fund this budget, including the asset replacement reserve transfer variance. Continuing on, this next paragraph about the Lisa Court reconstruction project, I touched on this earlier at the very beginning, but basically that is the grant funding that we received. We had not included this original project because of the magnitude of the project. It's just under $1 million if you add the water, the wastewater, and the township components. However, with the OCIF allocation and the water, wastewater rates have already included funding in there, we were able to include it in this budget before you here today. Continuing on, this is the area where there was an adjustment. So when we're looking at the tender to build the new fire hall, it was awarded to Gage Company Limited at the August 2nd, 2022. In the original draft that was posted online, that said 2023. When we go down to the next section, which is the Public Works Operations, it's the same thing. The tendering, when it was awarded on May 19th, that had originally said 2023, should have been 2022, and then Parks and Public Works, same thing. So it was the tendering dates, they all should have referenced 2022, and it was a typing error that they were referencing 2023. Continuing on, grant applications that are, these are not new. These are ones we've reported on over the years. They still exist and therefore still within our program. And as you recall, council directed to raise those funds over a period of time as opposed to all in 1 year's budget. So that's included again this year, same as first draft, no changes therein. But this is just to bring you up to date on those included. We are receiving, like I said, the December invoices. We will be closing out the year next week and doing all the rollovers so that by final draft, we should have more up-to-date information for you and an estimate of where we think the reserves will be at the end of 2024. Continuing on to the stabilization of the tax rate. As you know, phases 1 and 2 were completed back in 2013 and 2015, where we do not use any of the OLG casino funds towards a subsidy on our municipal tax rate. It was used historically to offset some of the transfer into the asset replacement reserve that changed a number of years ago. And then since 2016, we have over 77% of our annual depreciation in there at this point. And in this particular budget, we're asking for 94% of the audited depreciation value to be placed into that reserve. That is reduced from the 100% on the first draft ask. And again, all of these items are available for discussion today with council. The attachments provide the details on the various budget summaries, tax rate calculations, and budget reports. Council and the budget committee have copies of the detailed operating reports, and then publicly posted are the summary pages included in the agenda. Therefore, that completes an overview of second draft and the changes therein. And I'll just turn it back over to the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks for that. And thanks for the outline of all of those changes. With regards to we're now at the point where we get our second crack at the work before us today with regards to the budget. Probably makes sense to start with the operating. If anyone has any conversations or questions with regards to each department outline. Obviously, we have the members of our departments here. They can answer questions with regards to the respective departments, but I'll turn to council to start the conversation with regards to the operating, and then we can go to capital. Does that make sense? Everyone seems in agreement. Deputy Mayor, over to you.
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Kimberly, for once again a thorough review of our budget. Quick question for you on the departmental summary before you went into each of the operating ones. You've kind of highlighted the fact that there's all these increases that's universal against all the departments. Got it. I guess the question would be, is there a dollar value that you know that's associated with those increases? Like that were obviously they're increases that we have no control over. But then the second part of that question is that dollar value part of the increase you see from each of the other departments? You know what I mean? So like, is there any way, and I don't expect you to do it for now, is to break out, here's the things within our control, and here's the things outside of our control that are changing within those departments. That make sense? Thank you.
Absolutely, through you, Deputy Mayor, to council, all the information definitely is available and it is included in the budget. So yes to that question. And you're right, I could definitely pull that information, but it's not at my fingertips today, but I'd be happy to do so. We can put a dollar value and tell you because it depends if it's all sitting in, depending on the various departments, we have to look at each department and then just pull that value over, but it's in the GL, so we could definitely extrapolate that and give that to you, but it's not readily available today. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, just for clarity, when we're talking about discussing this operating, if I want to get into the details of the individual things under the operating, will we have a chance later? Or do I need to do that now?
To answer that question, it really kind of depends. I mean, within the operational, you can speak to any general questions with regards to the operations budget to any of the department heads here. But with regards to more granular, that's where is the recommendation that to schedule meetings with the department heads to ask those questions in more detail in case it's, for instance, about an identifiable individual. We can't have that open discussion at this point because it's an identifiable individual. So it's pertaining to sort of macro questions and it really depends on the content of what you're looking for.
Through the chair. So just case in point, under the operating budget, Public Works, there's a bunch of things under Public Works that I would like to ask questions about. Nothing personal per se, but one thing that comes to mind right off the top. So this Lisa Court improvement, the $300,000 that's been granted, was that on the basis that that particular enhancement to Lisa Court happens, or was that part of the gas tax or what used to be called the gas tax?
Mr. Hancock?
Oh,
Thank you. I'll just start and then we'll hand it back over. So the funding is formula funding. And so therefore we receive an allocation. It does have specific items that it can be applied to and has been Public Works related in regards to water and wastewater and roads. So we take a look at those projects. In the past, there have been other projects that it has been applied to, and we can look back. I can pull that data for you. So basically we go to the Director of Public Works, ask what programs it could be applied to, and then he selects those from his list of programs in need. It is not something where we took an application and submitted because it's formula-based funding. We just didn't know at the point of the first draft. I believe that's the announcement that came out on the 7th, the day of our meeting, that the notice of the amount. And so now we can publicly speak about it. We've been given the opportunity to review and see which projects would be eligible. They would only be eligible under the Public Works Department, no other department, because that funding is not eligible under those funding projects. But the actual project itself, it's not a specific application for just that project, no.
So Mr. Mayor, just through to Councillor Byrne, Lisa Court was identified by us as what they could refer to as a now needs project. Primarily on the street, it was, we had a number of deficiencies, including sanitary sewer settlement, service settlements, storm sewer settlement with what they call depressions occurring near the structures, catch basins, and of course the road infrastructures in pretty bad shape. The other item that we wanted to deal with, we have a median at the end of the street. We'd like to look at removing that and redoing the cul-de-sac because we do receive a number of complaints on that in that area. So the project is identified as a now project. It is on the tax side of it is funded through this grant. So it's the candidate we put forward before. We withdrew it because we weren't sure of the dollar amount. Now that we have the dollar amount, it covers what they call the tax portion of it. The other portion is water, wastewater user rate, item that we do normally identify a capital project, so it is in there as a capital project also. Hopefully that identifies, answers the question.
Follow up, Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair, yeah, I was more concerned with if we didn't do the Lisa Court, Crescent Court, whatever you want to call it, this time around, we would lose that other funding that's still there to use for anything else in the public works domain. We don't sacrifice anything from that. And am I right in thinking that used to be called the gas tax or something on that lines? No.
So there's a separate, the CCBF is the old gas tax. So OCIF is a completely different stream. So the CCBF is what you'll see in the highlighted area. If you go to the capital plan, you can see that we forecasted, actually I have a question about it, so I'll get to it later. We had pre-identified a remainder in the reserve of about 111,500, I think. And yeah, sorry, Kimberly, I'll let you do the details later. Anyways, we had pre-identified a remainder because there was a reserve of that money, and we didn't have before the pre-first, or at the time of the first draft, we get told what we we're going to get for 4 years at one point. The fourth year happened to be 2023. So we had no idea at the first draft what our next 4-year allotment was going to be. So that's where, if you go to the top in the summation report, you can see the 311,000 that we've utilized towards the slurry seal. That's the gas tax, because we've now been given that allotment that we know, in addition to utilizing the reserve, which is where my question's coming, just to give you a foreshadowing, is with regards to that money. So the OCIF is more, what projects do you have the due diligence done that now you can make eligible and fund through this process? So it wasn't going to, when the budget committee met, it was such a, I think, $1 million+ project in totality when you add the water, wastewater component and the public works component. So there just wasn't any room in the budget, and it was something that we thought the expertise of staff suggested might be able to be done next year. So, and then knowing a half, maybe it was foreshadowing on their part that they knew that we would find out about this funding between the first draft and the final budget presentation. So that funding announcement has now made this project eligible to be fully funded by this grant. That makes sense? Okay. Very good. Thanks for that, Kimberly, and thanks for that, Wayne. So I'll ask my question while we're on the subject then. How about that? So my question was, you outlined in the summation of changes the 311,000 that is subsidizing the remainder. I was just curious, because we knew that there was, and we kind of what was revealed was that there was a balance outstanding. And now that we have the 4-year forecast of what the funding is going to be each of those years, with the utilization of the remainder for the slurry seal projects in the budget and the capital list, is there any amount in that reserve account or from the gas tax or in the CCBF reserve?
I believe the value was around 40,000 at the time when we had our budget committee meeting. I just didn't look up the number recently. However, it's roughly around there. We didn't go further and take more from that. We left the original amount from first draft and then added this grant. So there is funding in there. Why there's usually often money left over in the CCBF is because we usually budget for the full amount annually every year. And when all the invoices come in, sometimes we have a amount that we didn't have to use. And so then it goes back in. The one thing about all of these grant programs is they prefer that even though they're formula and they're not allocated, they want them spent either in the current year or the following year. They prefer not to. So our historical practice is to try to spend and use it towards a current infrastructure project in need, as opposed to holding on to the funds and not spending it, because then we're questioned as to why we're not spending the funds they're giving us. Did I answer?
And you're around the answer, but I guess my question was, we're now seeing the number when I look at the capital budget about the 311 when it's in the summation report, right? I know we had already allocated about 100 because there was about 130, 140,000. So when I go through the capital budget, which I know we're skipping ahead, but we're here now, so that's fine. We have really allocated all of the gas tax, or a large portion of the gas tax, both old and new, towards the slurry seal and the eligible projects. So I guess my question is, have we fully utilized the reserve and the new allotment in the current capital program, or is there going to still be a remainder left over in the reserve? And if so, is there any other eligible projects that we could utilize the entirety of any reserve? Because now we know for the next 3 years exactly what we're going to be receiving. We're not in that sort of, purgatory of not knowing for the next long time. So it doesn't really make sense to keep a reserve when we can forecast and know exactly what we can utilize, unless the director seems to think there's a bigger capital year or maybe a big, more robust program for slurry seal next year that we might want to carry forward. So it's kind of a two-parter. Have we used the entirety of what was both received this year and what was remaining, or is there still sort of a buffer amount? And if so, is there a buffer amount can be allocated to any projects in the capital list still today? Does that make sense?
Thank you. So I know I often reference this and I will again, but it's not meant to be an excuse. The December invoices are coming in and we'll consolidate whether or not we've spent all of the funds from the 2023 year. I believe there was about $40,000 in there unspent that we could possibly dip into that will end up being a reserve. It's one of the reasons why the reserve spreadsheet doesn't get updated till the next draft, because I don't actually know those numbers. They would all be estimated. So in a short answer, I believe the answer is yes at this point, unless someone suddenly brings in an invoice that we're not expecting. I believe there's about 40. There might actually be more if some of our projects come in under, and so we could advise of that. But I hesitate to speak to that until I know, but I could definitely bring that back to you.
Yeah, with regards to the capital plan, maybe this is for you, Mr. Hancock. I know what it is reserved for or can only be allocated to. So I'm not sure we even have an additional project that even if there was remainder, because I know we've been utilizing it for slurry seal, is if there proves to be, after all of the auditing is done, and we know for a fact that there's a remainder, if there is any, whether it's 40,000, 50,000, 20,000, whatever, are there any projects that aren't funded or that are currently being proposed to be funded by the levy that are potentially eligible for any amount of gas tax or CCBF funding that we haven't utilized as of yet?
I think, Mr. Mayor, first of all, I would say two things. One, we're not sure where the market value is this year, so it's probably worthwhile understanding what we have left over, and if there's if the tender prices are going to prove, relatively close to our estimates. That's number one. And number two, I don't think there's a particular problem. We have certain things in there that are identified, like crack sealing and things like that. Even intersection improvements with the county that you can offset. You could certainly look at offsetting funding on those in part with any additional funds that are over. And I would suggest that we probably keep it in the coffers and have Kimberly finalize the numbers for the year, see what we have, see where the tenders go. And if there's funds, looks like it's left over, I would, it would be reasonable of council to ask for staff how you want to utilize those extra funds.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hancock. So then, Kimberly, if it's not, so if crack sealing, for example, there's a $25,000 allotment there. I do agree, especially given the fluctuations in tender prices that, this year and last year, it does make some sense because the cost, the estimates and the utilization of that, there probably will be under estimates in there. So there'll probably be more. So having a certain amount, whether it's, tens or twenties or thirties or thousands, but is it possible, you think you could have that estimated number finalized maybe for even this evening so that we could know exactly if council thinks that there's enough of a buffer for the increase, saying that there might be a 10 to 15% increase in the tenders for the projects we're utilizing. So we're going to want to keep some amount there, but just so that council has surety that if we're going to keep money that we could use back, that we know exactly what, and if just to make sure council feels comfortable with that number.
I could definitely bring forward a value of what's available in there that we're not trying to draw in this year's budget, but I can't tell you if there's a surplus from the 2023 year or if we need to dip into it because the costs were higher, because I don't have all the final invoices. So as long as you don't anchor me to that number, I can give you an estimate based on what was sitting there before and then what we've taken from it and what could potentially be available at tonight's evening meeting.
That works for me. Thank you. And sorry to get out of the weeds into the capital too quick. Councillor Natchoff, question?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Ms. Pope or anyone, can you just speak for the public's interest what the increase was for committees of council since it went from 14 to close to $50,000? Thank you.
Thank you. I can definitely do that. So I know it's a summary format in the agenda, but if council were to turn to the boards and authorities. There's 3 pages. I'll start on page 1 of 3. Okay. So in there, we have library, which is already presented. We don't need to go into that. There are 3 conservation areas where there were changes. So the Kawartha Conservation Area, their total expense went up by 2.74%. They went from 6,758 to the 6,943. That's in the center of page 1. The Autonomy Region Conservation Authority, they went up by 4.02%, going from a bit 101,000 to 105. Millbrook Valley Trails has budgeted for contracted services and materials and supplies, and their overall expense increase is 3.17%. They're actually asking for 6,500 as opposed to 6,300. So it's a relatively small budget, but in percentage, it looks large. Committee of Adjustment is asking for the same 2,000 to 2,000 from last year to this year. Mr. Hack, we have a rollover of a heritage position that we had funded in the 2023 budget. There are still some components there to be completed. The grant is no longer available, so we've only rolled over the funds that were available that we raised last year. So that's included in here. And then on top of that rollover, Mr. Hack has heritage awards of 500, contracted services of 1,500, landscaping of 1,000, cemetery signage of 3,000. Then in addition to that, we have the 2, there's a Sustainable Advisory Committee. There are 2 items listed there. One is for contracted services of 30,000. One for, it's listed as special equipment, but I know there's another term for that, and we can talk about that with the committee, but there's 5,000 there. So this is brand new. And so it's a $35,000 ask. So when you're looking at last year's budget at 0, it looks massive, but it's unique. It's brand new. And the other one that's not reporting here, we don't have a budget for it because it's brand new. Can the clerk assist me with the name of that one? Because it doesn't appear in the financial reports yet. Thank you.
Through Mayor Graham, it is the Accessibility Advisory Committee.
And just to finish that off, because that one is new and it's unknown at this point if there are any funds required, what have you, that's technically 0. And that's why it doesn't report here, because there's no financials to report on that one as of yet.
Thank you very much. I just wanted the public to be aware that the largest increase, but is just for the fact that we've added the Sustainability Advisory Committee. So if people were just looking to go, wow, that's a massive increase, but we have a new committee. Thank you.
In addition to that same subject, I know staff are reviewing with the committee, whether that $30,000 data analyst person is going to be a committee expense versus a staffing expense. We don't know exactly. Do we have any sort of foreshadowing or understanding what the horizon when we might council might receive a report on that? Because I don't think it's going to be probably within the budget time frame with the 20th. Is that fair to say? Maybe Ms. Hurley, with regards to the status of that data analyst and how that we're going to manage that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So the question is, how are we going to manage that? So right now, staff is actually investigating whether or not what that cost would look like for either hiring a consultant to do that work or actually hiring a contract service individual to do that work. And so that is something that we're currently investigating at this time.
But it's unlikely that we'll have that number before the end or the final budget presentation on February 20th, I'm assuming, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, we are hoping to have more information. We actually have reached out to a variety of consultants. Staff has contacted quite a few, actually. So they're going to continue to have that conversation in hopes to be able to come back to the final budget report.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair to Ms. Pope. In the more granular form, I have 2 of 3 in the 12-month ending period stuff. I was wondering about that because you talked about the rollover just now. For the proposed 2023, there was 0 numbers, and now we're rolling over this $30,000 number. I just wasn't sure about that. And then when I look farther down under expenses for that Mr. Hat, they all call it. I don't know what that means, but anyways, I'm looking at the layout for the gross wages and the allocated salaries and trying to make sense of how that moves into the 24 budget.
Thank you. So normally there isn't a rollover too often that occurs with one of our boards. However, we had a project that we had funding for and we raised the funds last year for it. And so we have those funds. We're not asking for new funds. So you're right. We don't budget for something like that. It's not planned that we wouldn't finish that project. If it was finished, we wouldn't have the discussion. There'd be no rollover. Because the project is still ongoing and because we still have those funds, we're rolling it over because we're not going to go back out to the taxpayer and ask for more money on a project they've already funded. So they funded for us to do this work last year. It's still in transition to be completed. Part of it is transition. We had a staff member working here and left to go work elsewhere. Therefore, we have to refill that in some capacity to get the final works done. How that's being completed, we've done an estimate using only the rollover funds. So we haven't asked for a single penny more in the 2024 budget to complete it. We're just simply rollovering what we already did receive. So the project could be done in this current year. The only new ask from the Mr. Hack Committee, which was exactly the same as what they asked for last year, but it's those 4 items at the bottom, which is the Heritage Awards, contracted services, landscaping, and cemetery signage. The rest of it, all of the wages and the benefits adds to the rollover. So we're not asking for anything additional. And you're right, there would be a 0 in a budget from a previous year because we weren't planning there to be any type of rollover.
Follow-up question, Councilor Byrne?
Not really, but since it was brought up in the overview early on, and I'm afraid I'll get a chance to ask later because I'm not sure of the process. But under parks and facilities in the overview, it mentions an increase of $10,000 in contracted services for the new rec center next door. It looks like they're going to check gauges after a 5-year period since installation. How often are we looking at that cost coming back? This would be on page 22 of the overview you talked to early on.
Mr. Allison, are you going to speak to that? If not, Ms. Pope?
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, it is a regulatory requirement to replace the pressure relief valves every 5 years.
So just to clarify then, so is this, are we amortizing this $10,000 over 5 years, or is it a 10,000 a year for a $50,000 cost that occurs once a year, or is it are we doing it every year for $10,000?
Through you, Mayor, this is a one-time $10,000. The quote is $7,800 to replace the pressure relief valves and the refrigeration, and it'll be 12 to 16 hours labor on top of that.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I guess if this is the 5-year mark, we got to spend 10,000 this year to replace it. Will we not just be dropping a few $1,000s in the pot for the next couple of years so that we're not having the big expenditure every 5 years from going forward? Is that we should be doing for next year, I guess?
Through you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Huntley, for sure, yes, we can plan ahead and make sure we have the funds available 5 years from now.
Yeah, my understanding, this is a new regulation that we were being made aware of, so that's why it's a one-time cost, but now that it's a planned 5-year expense, we'll amortize it like we do most of the other things, so thanks for that. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, on that note, for the office of the clerk, is now an appropriate time to talk about the Humane Society claim?
Yes?
Well, I'm not sure how to proceed because I'm not sure why we needed this to get into this arrangement. And when I went digging a little deeper to try to find out the extent of this problem of stray dogs in the township, to me, the little bit I found out without knowing why staff brought this forward, it looks like a poor use of taxpayers' money at the present time, but I'm willing to learn more and try to figure out better.
Sure. Do you want to go, Ms. Pope, and then, or sorry, clerk, would you like to go, Ms. Page, or would you like me to start? Yeah, so with regards to, so last year was a transition year where we didn't have anywhere to take dogs, stray dogs that we're actually picking up. So, as many of you know Deb and have met Deb, she does great work, but the issue is if she finds a dog in the evening, she's not legally permitted to take it home. And so we don't at the present time have anywhere to take a dog that we find in the evening. And what's the current practice is she's actually asking either the property owner where the dog is found to watch it for the evening so she can come back and then begin her work to try to find the owner, or it's just left outside and not addressed in any capacity. And then hopefully she can find it in the morning when she's able to do it. The issue being is that there was a long history of relationship with the Peterborough Humane Society that they terminated our agreement moving forward when we didn't meet their request for funding towards their new facility. So I know staff have done a number of, over the last year and this year, have reached out to a number of local providers with regards to alternative methods to provide the service. The issue is usually liability for the business owner with regards to a dog that we don't have ownership clarity of or a vaccination record of, and maintaining that dog in close proximity with other pets that are usually there under the expectation that they've all been have the rabies and distemper vaccines and things like that. But it's more of a legal hurdle than it is an actual process hurdle. But I'll let the clerk speak to fill in any more. But that's sort of the justification behind it, is that the Humane Society is the only area in the pet space that fills in the gap between vet clinics and kennels. And so they have, kennels don't provide inoculations, and even vet clinics in most cases, unless you're a client, don't provide inoculations for any of these things as well. So if they were to go to a place, they would have no record of their vaccination, and that leaves those potential hosts, to a significant amount of legal exposure. Should that dog bite another dog and have rabies or things of that nature, that person is going to be subject to significant legal exposure. But I'll let the clerk sort of fill in any of the gaps with regards to the more recent efforts that she and staff have been undertaking. This page.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. And that was a great synopsis that has brought us to the situation that we are today. So ultimately, Humane Society is the only facility that's able to provide all of that level of care in a legal and safe situation. To date, though, staff have received additional information that's been brought to our attention. So we are going to seek that council would defer the decision of the Humane Society until staff is given an opportunity to follow up on the additional information that's been provided to us to investigate if there is an alternative solution other than securing an agreement with the Humane Society.
Yep. Okay. So there's more work to be done, and we can see we'll probably have to consult legal with regards to the opportunities that we just don't want to get anyone in trouble, because people take their pets very seriously. And, especially when things happen to them under somebody else's watch. I mean, they did let them run loose or they did become loose in the initial, but I think there's a lot to be said with regards to that. So we'll wait and see for the next budget discussion if there's an update. But, I know personally, I talked to a few vet clinics about potentially offering us a bridge service, but because of that legal circumstance, there was just no interest. And 15,000 sounds like a lot of money to us, but, when you think about emergency vets and the things, they might make that in a couple hours of activity at their clinic. So I was disappointed too, but glad to hear that staff's working on potential other opportunities. But if not, it sounds like the Humane Society is really it. Other questions with regards to other subjects? Did that answer your question, Councilor Byrne? Just want to make sure.
I think so. I think it means I stay quiet until the next discussion, basically on that topic. But if we could move on, I'd like to understand a little bit about our actual police contract that we have, because there's a section in here where we're talking about it. And I don't understand the factual data behind this. Do they get automatic increases? We're paying their insurance as well, the increases. I've yet to see the actual contract, and I'm not sure when it comes up for renewal.
Kimberly would like to speak to that, but I can provide some clarity. So we entered in, I believe, a 4-year agreement after a couple of years when it was coming up for renewal. We looked to the OPP to actually provide a quote. So we only received 2 quotes, and the OPP took over a year, I believe a year and a half, to actually get a quote for service, and was less service for more money. So that was the decision of council of the day at that time, to proceed with the police services contract, which has built-in increases and certain flexible components, whether it's insurance and the increases. There are certain things that they're able to increase their charges for. It's not just a full service all encompassing agreement year over year. There's built-in changes and increases in incremental costs that they can charge for us, things like overtime and things like that. There's clauses within the agreement, but if you'd like the agreement, I know it's not a very contentious document. I'm sure Miss Page you can schedule a meeting with her to go through it, if I'm not mistaken. Miss Pope. 4 letters starting with a P. Anyways, I apologize for that, but I'll let Miss Pope speak to it to fill in any of the gaps I've left.
Thank you. We had quite a bit of dialogue back in 2020 and thank you for your question. I have some details here today and I'm going to try to answer as best I can. The one thing is that we had an agreement that was going to expire. We were looking at whether or not we would go to the OPP. There are various reports. They're all public reports and we can direct you to them on the website from our previous clerk. Talking about the police services, there was an amended agreement. There's a City of Peterborough Police amended agreement offering to us 2-year. It came back to council. Council had discussions, reduced it down to a 1-year, and the contract it ended up being 1 year and 14-month extension. So we have an original contract agreement, and then we have an amended agreement that amends that to do the extension after we decided we would stay with them. So that answers one piece of it. So we have the original 2015 agreement that's online, and we can direct you to that. Still in existence today, just it has been amended. We can point you to direction on the amendment as well. As far as the cost, some people assume that just because the City of Peterborough or the City of Peterborough Police has an overall cost, that's an automatic cost increase to us. No, they give us a detailed breakdown of the various areas that they cover for us and what those incremental increases are for us. We did have the discussion way back in 2015 when we signed the first agreement, and it was discussed that we needed to be under their insurance program and we had to pay that separately, and that is completely outside of our control. So each year we receive the contract costs, which are included in here. We receive the insurance in advance of the year, so we now have that. That's included in here. What I have in here is the overtime reconciliation. We never know. So sometimes it's a credit, more often it's not. And so I can't speak to that one directly. So yes, there are increases, but they're not generic. They're very detailed. They're provided by the City of Peterborough in a detailed fashion under the operations of the municipality.
Follow up, Councilor Brennan.
Through the chair, thank you. My big fear is the City of Peterborough has just allocated millions and millions of dollars for a new building that will probably be very grand, and I'd hate to be paying for it. So I don't know how that factors in when they come back and tell us that their administration costs have dramatically gone up because they just bought new real estate on Lansdowne Street to build a great big new building. Are we looking at that being an impact?
Ms. Pope.
Thank you. I can say that we haven't been advised that we're part of that larger encompassing project, pending any new information perhaps that we might receive in the future. The actual contract itself has gone up 4.51%, and the actual insurance went from 16,226 to 18,400. So that's a 13.4% increase. That's the insurance side. So overall, those two components together were up to 1.5 million at a 4.61 increase over last year.
Thank you for that, Ms. Pope. Yeah, with regards to that, you are right about that did come up. There's been lots of discussion on the police board with regards to the new facility. They're optimistic. I mean, it's obviously going to be cheaper than building a Taj Mahal from the ground up. So that's fortunate. But we're really fortunate that we still are within the context, because I would expect in the next negotiation of any extension, they'll be coming after for a portion of additional costs with regards to that. We're lucky that we're insulated in the agreement to the costs that are only directly affiliated with our municipality, and we provide space for them in the township office right now. So that insulates us from that exposure as well. Councillor Huntley, question, or sorry, Councillor Natchop, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Just no one had said, what year does the renewal come up for this current contract?
Ms. Pope.
So we're actually into what they call an extension agreement. So that is still being discussed. I'm just not sure because of the renewal after the last extension agreement exactly where they're at, but we can take that away and clarify with you.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. So our anticipation would be that it would happen sometime before the end of this council's term.
I believe that to be the case. I believe that was a part of the extension justification, is that it wasn't coming up in an election year, and that it would probably be, I think next year would be the year we'll probably be up for renegotiation, but don't quote me on that, but I'm sure Ms. Pope can provide that to all the council, so we're aware. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, as far as capital infrastructure projects go, I was looking to see through some of the finer documents to see if we finished the 4-bay construction down by the old Millbrook Public Works Yard for a new 4-bay garage for the Parks and Rec. I was kind of expecting some of those numbers would be in here that would get us closer to what the guesses were back 2 or 3 years ago. And maybe even, I don't know how close we are to the new operational center, having actual actual data to say what the costs are and whether we're above or below the guess that was made back in the day.
Ms. Pope, would you like to speak to that? But again, like it's not necessarily a guess. I mean, it was a tender document. No, but it was a tender document. So there's an agreement between parties for the construction for that said price. That the issue comes up when tender prices change, it's usually because those projects haven't been started or commenced. And that's when those things lose relevance, but I'll let Ms. Pope fill in some of the finer details.
Through you, Chair, to all of council. So in a perfect world, if a contract goes exactly as per the tender, and we basically have all our bill done and the invoices are all in, then we'll come back to council with all the details. That would be in a perfect world. In a non-perfect world that we live in, there are often delays and changes that occur during that period of time. We often thereafter will have to bring forward a report, because unless we're under budget, we would never go forward if we were over budget. We would have to come back to council with a report as to why. So it's preliminary at this point. We don't have all the final numbers in, so we can't actually report on it yet, but guaranteed we will report on it for 2 reasons. Number 1, we need to make sure that you're advised if there are any changes. And number 2, as we move forward in the original approvals, there was an approval to go to Infrastructure Ontario for the debenture. And so I have to come back with bylaws for the debenture. So council will be apprised of the information once it's available to us. However, again, we're still getting the December invoices in and still processing them and closing out the projects. So we're just not there yet to be able to advise council as of yet.
If I'm not mistaken, Ms. Pope, but didn't the Millbrook yard come in slightly under budget, if I'm not mistaken?
That one did. We're bringing the 2 of them forward for Infrastructure Ontario. We were waiting because it was in the current year and that one flowed forward. We were going to bring forward the 2 projects. We're just waiting for those 2 to come forward in one report together, and then the fire will be reported separately. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting history to repeat itself, unfortunately, in that regard, but it has occurred not too distant past. So there's some sliver for optimism. Other questions? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to that item, Ms. Pope, you mentioned earlier in the summary about how the CPI number was increasing by 4%, which affects the wages. That other construction increase, and I'm just trying to find it here, but it was 6 something, I think, if I remember right. Would it impact the new fire hall? Is that what we're looking at there?
Spoke.
Thank you. Through the chair to council. So that's sort of twofold. So the CPI does affect the wage grid and does adjust the wages which are included in the budget. You're correct there. As far as the 6%, that's the indexing on the construction price index, which is applied to development charges to keep our development charges relevant. It's part of the bylaw. However, out in the market, and I can't speak for what's happening out there, but obviously if that quarter and the indexing is happening, it's happening in other places as well. So I can't speak to the industry, but I wouldn't be so blind to say that it's not affecting them.
And part of that justification for market changes or cost overruns is why all of the tenders include a sort of a buffer of a fraction of a percentage, so that there is a catchment where there is a threshold that overruns are kind of accounted for in that regard, but we don't forecast them based on the construction index. That's more for the DC portion. Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Pope, for that. Questions? I had a couple. With one question I had, I think I'm going to talk about the capital landing. We've been bouncing back and forth, so I apologize for that for staff. With regards to the splash pad, there was 90,000 put away last year. And in the current budget, we have 160,000 identified for that project. I just want to confirm, because the way it's presented now, it's that 160. So I got two questions on that. One, how it's reflected in the capital budget right now is it's presented as a transfer to reserve. It was my understanding, or at least my interpretation, that we should be building that was going to be constructed, or at least started construction, and the intention was for that to be done this year when we put away the 90 last year. And now that it's identified as a transfer to reserve, that kind of insinuates to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that it won't be built this year, which is how other things that are being built this year are reflected. So two questions is, one, is that accurate? And if so, could we not change that so that it's reflected, if I'm right, that we're hoping to begin construction on that this year? And then the second is, if I'm not mistaken, the quote that we had, and I believe this came to council, was closer to the 220s, I want to say, below 230, I believe. So that might be an opportunity, that having a quote on what we're intending to move forward, and also the looming outlier that there might be opportunities for Trillium funding, as there was in the past, that we haven't applied for and we can't really budget for. But I would think we would have a good opportunity with regards to that project to reduce that amount by, let's say, $20,000, so that we're well within the total project cost, even if the funding wasn't going to come through. Sorry, that's a lot of questions. I should have broken it apart. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to council, you are correct that we do have it identified as a transfer to reserve. So if the project were to continue forward and actually occur in 2024, we can absolutely move that over. But first and second draft both do identify transferring into reserve. So that does not assume that the build is happening in 2024 based on the documents before you.
While we're on that part, so that was my understanding, but that, I just didn't know if other council had, if it was just me on my island again, or, but the understanding was it was going to be started this year, hopefully finished, was my interpretation. Deputy Mayor Huntley, you want to speak to that?
Through you, Chair, yeah, I believe at the last budget meeting, Mr. Allison, you were going to go get refreshed quotes, for starting in the spring for those. Like, I don't remember it being pushed to a reserve.
Mr. Allison?
Through you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Huntley, I did go get a quote for 2024 pricing. The original pricing was $207,310. The updated 2024 pricing right now is $226,483, and could be completed in 2024.
Okay, so that covers off. Ms. Hurley, did you want to speak to that? Sorry, before
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Allison. The quotation that we have is it not for 2023? Or did you get a revised one on top of that? Because my question is, it seems like every time we get a quote, it raises about anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 a year. So I just want to confirm if you have that opportunity or not to confirm that. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, to the CAO. It is, the quote was received in November 2023, and it was 2024 pricing, which is $226,483. And depending on when we ordered, I did speak with ABC Recreation a little while ago. We're looking at a 8 to 10 week lead time right now, but it depends on orders are coming in every day right now.
So all the more importance that it be moved to an action is when that project is approved, that you'll be getting that quote out or actioning that quote as soon as possible. So I'm sure they would love to update it every few minutes if they could. So, okay, well, given that, I mean, seeing as the quote is good for 2024, I don't think there's a need to over budget beyond, that sort of 230,000. So, but in essence, I guess what we could do if council is amenable to it is, first of all, I think we should have a motion to move it from transfer to reserve to capital, just so we're clear that that's happening. I think that should be a part of the motion, just so we're all clear. And then I guess the addition to the motion, that be the 160,000 transfer to reserve be reduced to 140,000, and that the project be moved to be commenced in 2024 and not be a transfer to reserve. questions with regards to that motion, Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I guess the only thing on it is in purple, it does say future purchase date 2024. So there's a little bit, like it.
Yeah, and that's consistent with the adjustment from transfer to reserves. I mean, and the quote is from November 2023, so two change months ago. And so that motion confirms all of that, and it just reduces the total capital budget by the 20,000 that wasn't identified in the quote. And while the quote's still good to move forward in the year, then we don't have to overtax for a project, and we can get what we're asking for. And in addition to that, I think it's very likely, as it was years and years ago when the first project was started, to talk about it might be ineligible funding for whether it's Trillium or other sources of funding that are just being announced, some of which are announced at Roma, but Trillium is usually pertaining to those sorts of infrastructure is probably a likely candidate. So that might even reduce it by less, but that's kind of my justification to not overtax 20,000 for the project that we're commissioning for the full value being there. And then if we are successful with any funding opportunities, then that would become surplus funds or to cover the cost of additional. Any other questions with regards to that motion? Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, I was under the impression when we were discussing this, that they haven't even figured out where they're going to put it at the new rec center, that there was a lot of discussion about the format they had laid out for different things being added. And I wasn't sure that there was concrete at where the splash pad was going to go, because we're still talking about location of parking lots and other applications.
All of the splash pad infrastructure is already in place from when the community center was built. So that's not a portion of Robert's, the big map with all the other components changing. The infrastructure was a part of the initial build. So there's only one place it can go. And that's why it's all the more important that we get this quote approved and get it built, hopefully for the springs or the summer season. Ms. Hurley.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just to add to that, the quote actually identified the location because the infrastructure is already there. Yes, just to share that information with you. So the quotation is actually for the design is for the right location, which has already been built or quoted on that location.
The location of it is just to, I guess I want to get my directional north, the west of the existing park. The playground area, yeah. So it's just to the west of there. Okay, any other questions about the motion? If not, we can take a mover and a seconder for that motion. Councillor Natchoff. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. Any questions of the motion? All in favor? That is approved. There we go. 20,000 less. Success. Great work, everybody. So by my calculation, Ms. Pope, the only other thing that wasn't identified in the capital list that was since in the library's presentation was the $330 that was to be moved over as well. So by my calculation, that's 23,000 at 300 that we've totally reduced from the capital budget now, just so we're keeping on track. Other questions about other subject matter? We've been at it about an hour. If council, we can keep going through, or we can take a short recess for a bio break. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute recess now, and we'll continue back with the conversation thereafter. Thank you. All right. We'll now reconvene the meeting after that brief recess. With regards to, the one thing that we haven't done yet is really go through the capital budget. Did the high level operation. I know there's more operational questions, so we'll come back to that. But maybe what we could do now is, if we'd like, is to go through the capital budget. So if you want to flip to those portions of your book, it's the horizontal pages with regards to all the content, starting with the Chief Administrative Officer and their department. I'll give everyone a second to get to there, and it's also on the screen as well above you. Yeah, but that. So it's before us. Yeah, that's it. That's it. You got here. Yeah. All right. Yep, that's it. There you are. So everyone has that before us now. So any questions with regards to the 0% levy implication with regards to the strat plan for the Chief Administrative Officer? Seeing none, that makes sense because there's no levy. So the next is the finance, the asset replacement, as Ms. Pope's already alluded to. There is 94%, and that's what equivalent to 2.567 million as it stands right now. Usually we save any conversations with regards to further reductions on that until much later in the process, but that's where we're at currently as it stands. As you see below, it says beneath the line, the 2023 capital request adjusted total. So last year, the total amount that we put towards asset replacement is 2.434201 million. Okay, any questions or clarity? We'll move on. Information and technology. This is Ms. Pope's department. There is a $10,000 cost for the software for financial management that we're almost complete the transition into now. That is the only budget implication, but there are a number of other projects. Any questions during or pertaining to any of those components of the capital budget? If none, we can always come back. I just want to go through piece by piece, but there's questions with regards to the IT capital. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, just because I finally found it. On the finance page, there's what I thought was fairly large for a toner contract. I'm not sure what that would be. Okay, okay. No, when you said finance, I'm sorry.
No problem. We're going to go back over the operations, but we're going to go on this finance page and just go piece by piece for now. No problem. No problem at all. Anyways, no questions with regards to the finance, IT management, capital. So we're going to move on to planning, building, and economic development. Any questions with regarding any of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 line items, only 2 of which are affecting the levy. With regards to the OP, we've already got 100K in this reserve. I know it's already been reduced. With the lack of announcements with regards to the PPS that was due in the September, we were forecasted to be told, is it realistic to expect that, without any horizon, anyone I've talked to in the building space, they have no idea when this document's coming forward. And without that document coming forward, and we also haven't received the county OP back yet either. Is it realistic are we optimistic that the OP is going to be a project we can commence? Because it's kind of a foundational document for a term of council, and we were hoping that, at least have it mostly started by now. And due to the provincial legislation and the provincial not reporting back on the county OP, we're kind of stuck. So I guess, is there any reason or any update with regards to when we think, if that's realistically going to be a document that we can start this term, or sorry, this year?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, certainly we can ask the planning department to comment on this. It's important to note that what we're proposing is we're actually putting monies into reserves so that we will have the funds like we have been last year as well. So that should the OP get approved at the county level and we commence our own for whatever timeframe, we can then, we can draw on that to start that process, obviously. But I still support putting monies away so that if we have to, it is a very large project. I should have to ask Miss Ellis exactly the last time we did an OP. I believe it was almost 2 years by the time we finished it, was it not? So I'm being optimistic in a 2-year period, obviously. She's added another 2 to that. So it is something that we continuously put monies away and then we don't have such a large amount when we do have to commence it. So I do, for that matter, I think at a staff level, I support it.
Yeah, my question was more because especially with the number of fingers that were just held up, the number of years that this document could theoretically take. Knowing that we've already put away 100K and we're identifying another 25K, are we expecting to have the front end costs of that entire study to be 125K that we'll need to disperse up front? Because my understanding, if we're almost 6 months behind, it's not going to be, certainly not going to be completed in 2024. Probably not, based on that, going to be completed in 2025. So where we thought, this would be the final year for the funding allotment, I can't foresee a world, especially now, that the whole 225,000 would be required this year. So it might be a chance to save a portion, maybe not none of it. But I just, you're more familiar with those tendering of those processes, but I believe it'll be probably costs sorted out over multiple years for that. So it might be where we thought we were going to be kind of started already and maybe needing the additional funds, we haven't even started. And we're already at 100,000. So even if we cut it by half, 12.5, it's 12.5 off the levy, and it's only 12.5 to add to the year next year, which we know if we even if start this year, there's going to be costs incurred next year too. But I guess it's a twofold question. One, response about the timeline, but then also are we expecting that 125 or 126,000 is the total cost for the entirety of the project, or is that also a number that might fluctuate necessarily?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would say the number, I can't tell you exactly until we actually tender for that work. So I'm not even sure. Ms. Ellis, can you comment on the cost for the last OP that we had? That might assist the question that Mayor is asking.
Through you, Mayor Graham, to members of council, members of staff, the last official plan took a little bit longer than anticipated. We started in a certain direction and then we switched direction partway through. So the cost of the last official plan, I'm sure, was more than $150,000. And that's kind of the number I would have in my mind for this time around. In terms of the timing, we are in a different world now. You are correct, Mayor Graham, that there is uncertainty in the planning world from the direction of the province. But the county official plan TAC has reconvened. We are meeting, we are revising the county official plan to address the current draft PPS in anticipation that there might be some announcements. So once the county official plan is approved, we will have 1 year to bring our document into compliance or conformance to the county official plan. So the time frame for the next official plan will be significantly shorter than the last round.
Okay, so based on that, we expect it might be upwards of 150,000. So we have 100,000 and we're only putting away 25 this year. So it doesn't sound like it's really worth cutting. Councillor Byrne, question?
Through the chair, just because I novice at this, can you give me kind of a Reader's Digest version? What would drive a cost of 150,000 to do an official plan, just because of my naive background?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Councillor Byrne, members of council. So the cost of 150,000 goes to the cost of hiring a consultant. There's significant public consultation in terms of doing consultation about the direction of the plan, agricultural issues, doing background reports about identification of issues, how people want to move through those issues. And mapping is a significant issue because we do not have the capability in-house of doing our own mapping. So we have to have someone who does that. And as you're aware, mapping in a planning document is a very important piece of the puzzle. And there's always a lot of tinkering and revisions to that mapping, so that will be a significant cost. But as I said, there is a significant public consultation component that involves advertising, space, that type of thing.
It is a massive document, hundreds and hundreds of pages, that is for sure. So and mapping, like you mentioned, is no small feat. Other questions with regards to that? If I'm not going to make a motion with regards to the 25 at this point because I've been talked out of it based on the number of fingers Ms. Ellis held up. So I'm like, oh boy, that's scary. So, and it sounds as if we're going to only have a year. Once the county one comes up, it could come at us pretty fast and furious. So, well, remains to be seen. The county one had a deadline of July 1st and we were told that needed to be met too. And well, here we are 8 months later without a document back yet. Anyways, onwards and upwards. Those are my questions with regards to planning and building ECDEV. Any other questions with regards to that department? If not, I'll flip the page. Going once, flipped. The next department is Parks and Facilities. So I already asked that one question. I'm just gonna cross it off my list with regard to the transfer and the water features of the splash pad. Questions with regard to other components in the Parks and Facilities capital plan? Counselor Byrne.
I don't know what all that takes in with the heating and ventilation system for Parks and Recreation. Is that just the new complex?
With regards to the HVAC unit? So that's just the one at the municipal office? Yeah.
On that note, we had a problem here this past week. Is that part of that process, or I never had a follow-up?
Either Ms. Hurley, Ms. Pope, or Mr. Allison?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne, we did have an issue on Saturday where there was a haze in the council chamber. Fire department did respond. We had the HVAC technician come in and they could find nothing wrong with the HVAC system. The haze was cleared. The fire department had the fans going, blew the area out, and the HVAC technician came back on Monday and did another sweep through and could not find any issues.
So with regards, but this is so planned work, or is this an amortization towards the replacement of the inevitability of the HVAC, and just with regards to why the 20,000's in the capital?
Through you, Mayor, the 20,000 is in the capital. This is the last unit that needs replaced at the municipal office here. At 5 units, all 20+ years old, and this is the last unit.
Thanks for that. Other questions for Parks and Facilities? Seeing none, we can move on to Protective Services. Chief is here. Any questions with regards to the Capital Protective Services budget? Councillor Edgerton and then Councillor Byrne.
To you, Mr. Mayor, the Fire Chief, I see down in here, Mr. Fire Chief, where you have the replacement 89 Chevy half-ton grass fire unit for 135,000. What in the world is in that half-ton for 135,000?
Through the mayor to Councillor Edgerton, that total cost is the cost of the unit itself, whereas the normal resident could go out and buy a half-ton. We're going to outfit the truck with a cap and various equipment that's to replace the unit that again is a 1989 regular cab pickup truck. This will be an expanded unit with a club cab, if you will, and caps and outfitting lighting package to bring it into service.
So a number of fixtures and additions afterwards. I know we just at the county, we were just looking at an SUV for the paramedic services, and the fixtures alone on that unit for just an SUV were over $30,000 in additional costs to the unit. So unfortunately, those lights and everything accompanying it are expensive. But Councillor Byrne had a question.
Through the chair, not so much a question on the budget portion. There was an email from another community not too long ago sent to me about the idea of petitioning somebody. I don't know what area the Ontario government looks after it, but this idea of having to replace fire equipment that's barely broke in because all of a sudden it meets some age requirement to be thrown out. I was talking to some people at the conference about the same thing, and I just wonder if there's any more information that this might be something that actually goes forward because it makes sense.
Chief, are you aware of anything in that regard? I know there was a number of preliminary discussions about the fire service, and I know it's a big expense for a lot of small rural municipalities like ours. I'll leave it to you.
Through the mayor to Councillor Byrne, I believe what you're speaking about is your pumper and tanker requirements of a 20-year lifespan. I'm not aware of the information that you're bringing forward if you just came back from a conference in regards to petitioning the government to extend the life of those vehicles. You are correct, the 20-year replacement on some of our units, although we're running 700+ calls a year, The units, it's a requirement of the fire underwriter survey. And it's affects, if they're not replaced, it affects your residents' insurance rating. So it's that organization that would need to be petitioned to extend the life of those units. We currently have a unit because of, we're in the works of replacing the hall, but we have units that we can't replace because they won't fit in our current facility. So we'll be looking to replace those ones to meet that requirement once the new hall is completed.
Oh, I'm back. Sorry. Thanks for that, Chief. Yeah, and I think I may have seen a letter of correspondence from another municipality, and I'll ask the clerk to go back over the ones that I've sent her. And if there is something on there that we can bring back to a future council meeting for support, we'll do that then. But we'll look for, I'm sure, especially after the conference, usually you see that some of those hot topics come, councils make motions and then it comes before us to either support or just endorse or just receive. So we'll look into that, see if we can find anything that there might be more lobbying that can be done with regards to a letter for council to review for sure. Other questions with regards to protective services in the capital budget? Not, we can move on to my favorite. Roads and environmental services. I'm sure there'll be a number of questions, as there already have been, about this department, but I'll turn it to the council to let other people start. Well, I'll just wait with excitement, by the way. Questions with regards to the roads and environmental services capital budget? Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair to Mr. Hancock. So can you explain to me the difference between like some of this resurface treatment as compared to slurry seal? I kind of thought that was the whole idea of the slurry seal, was that after we did the retarring of tar and chip, that this was supposed to extend the life. Am I missing a step somewhere along the line?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Byrne, the surface treatment projects are identified are for double surface treatment. That's where we're actually scarifying the old surface treatment and replacing with a new surface treatment. So that's a chip and tar, 2 layers. The slurry seal is identified here as a project where we typically slurry seal the projects that were completed last year. That is a surface slurry that is to give them an extended lifetime. So the surface treatment projects are identified individually. The slurry seal is to complete all the projects surface treated last year.
So we can expect that the surface treatment roads received or conducted in this year will be under the slurry seal portion of the capital budget next year. So it's always just back and forth. Got it. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, just for clarification, for the grader, it says that the future purchase date is 2023. Have we already purchased that one, or I think it was on the pre-approval list, but have we purchased it, or is it still waiting?
Through Mr. Mayor to Deputy Mayor, we did purchase the grader. The grader amount in the tender. So there was an amount identified for the water tanks, and that was in the original tender. They were moved to the new location, but it came within the budget allowance for that contract. So the tanks were always proposed as part of the tender. They were moved to a new location, but it was in the tender is what's referred to as a cash allowance. And they were moved and relocated under that cash allowance.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hancock. Other questions, members of council, in regards to the roads and environmental services capital budget? I know I alluded to a number of questions, but a lot of mine have already been answered through your due diligence, Mr. Hancock, so I appreciate that as always. Seeing no other questions with regard, Councillor Edgerton, over to you.
You, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Hancock, I see up in here, Public Works Operations Center, a generator, fuel system and monitoring system. Was that not in the original contract to supply a generator and that system with it?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Edgerton, there's 2 items there. One is it's an upgrade of the existing fuel system. That's presently a CompuTrol system. It's out of Vancouver is the system. We have had IT problems, so it's been identified as a a changeover to make we're actually doing it cooperatively with the county because the county has the same system. So we are looking at an upgrade to the software. The generator is a diesel. We originally had a gas generator at the operations center. We have allowed for, and the budget line here is for a gas generator for the new building. So it was not originally included in the first tender, no.
In addition to that, question from Councillor Edgerton, you can see that from the previous forecast in the first draft of the budget, we've identified that it's going to be quite significantly more expensive than we're initially thinking with the addition of some of the elements. Are none of those elements DC eligible, I'm assuming, based on how we're proposing to fund them at this time?
So, Mr. Mayor, your question, can you just repeat that? You're saying, are these grant eligible? Is that the question?
No, so with regards to, obviously, we've identified a significant, increase in the cost associated with this Operations Center generator fuel system monitoring system, et cetera. From the first draft, it was much closer to, I think it was $50,000, and now we're at 126. So I just didn't know if we've identified additional enhancements that might be required, if any of those enhancements, knowing that the majority of the work on the OC was growth related. I didn't know if any of the eligible, whether it's the generator or other components, if there's no portion of those components that might be DC eligible, not necessarily grant eligible.
I think, Mr. Mayor, that's a fair comment. I'm not sure that we looked at DCs. This is a capital item. We certainly can take that into account and review that. It's possible the operations center expansion, some of it was, we had looked at DCs to fund part of that, so we certainly can look at that part of it. I don't know that we were looking at specific replacement of existing items. The generator may be an item that is partially funded that way, and we certainly can review that.
Ms. Pope, is there anything you might want to contribute on that?
Yes, thank you. Through you to council, just when we're looking at replacement because of the actual operations center, and we did try to pull our maximums, there may not be funding available. We might have already hit that threshold, but again, I have to wait to final invoices have come in, so we can definitely take a look at that. And when you're talking about the fuel system and monitoring system, the IT components that would be hardware related could potentially we could have some funds coming from our asset replacement reserve. However, we don't know at this point because there's a component that's software, component that's hardware. County is experiencing the same issue, and because they're working on their CompuTrol replacement, we're in partnership with them being our IT managed service contract. So when we have more information, if that is a component that we could include, but we won't have that information available to us for the final draft, and that's why there's no inclusion of those additional funds. But definitely when the information comes, if we can reduce this cost using those measures, we would.
Okay, thanks for that summation. Councillor Edgerton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. Hancock. You said this generator is gas, and I presume that's natural gas that you're talking about. And there was a generator there to start with. How much bigger is this generator than it, or would the other one not do both places?
To Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Edgerton, the generator there was a small gas generator, gas operated generator, just ran the pumps. The one that is needed for the building was a natural gas generator that operated both the operations of both buildings and is a stationary unit just at the building. So it was a completely larger unit, and it was fueled by natural gas, meaning it was not dependent on fuel at our fuel pumps, but it operates the whole center. So it operates both buildings, et cetera.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair to Mr. Hancock, I'm looking here at the drill down for some of the expenses for, well, the one that confused me the most is what you're referring to as crushed asphalt, but the high volume of calcium, I'm guessing we're just using that to dampen the dust on all our gravel roads. And there's a fairly substantial cost for gravel budgeted, but I thought we bought Wilson's gravel pit to save that cost, and I'm not sure if I'm missing something there. The other thing that makes me wonder is the contracted services for Wilson pit, which I would think gets a lot more use than anywhere else compared to the old Larmer pit, which I think has been basically it's just filling in right now with debris that we need to get rid of. There seems to be a disconnect there that I would like to understand better.
So I think most of those expenses are under the operations budget, if I'm not mistaken again. So, but I mean, I think we're nearly through the capital budget now. So I think we can, if there's no other question, is there any questions about the capital? If not, the intention was to go back to the operating. So if we're all good, then that question, we can just roll right into that answer, Mr. Hancock, if you're ready. But there are no, just to confirm, is there any other questions with regards to capital? No. Okay, perfect. Then good transition. Over to you.
So through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Byrne, I believe you had 3 questions there, or 3 or 4. You were mentioning about the contracted services under Loose Top. Yes.
So for the 2 pits we operate, we bought the Wilson gravel pit, so we'd have gravel for supplying our work. I look at the contracted services there is quite low. The contracted services for the Larmer pit, if I understand it, is the old gravel pit at the end of the Larmer and Tapley, which we only use to fill in, but it seems to have a fair cost. The other thing that makes me wonder, we've been talked about this 3 or 4 times, I think, it still shows we're doing monitoring at landfill, which I thought should have been gone by now.
So first of all, we'll deal with the Larmer pit if I can, and just through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Byrne. At the Larmer pit there, the primary contracted services is for leveling up fill brought into the pit. Last year, we took the material from Main Street, was taken to there along with our own material, so our costs on contracted services are higher there because we usually bring in a dozer to level. That's on the Larmer pit. On the Wilson pit, our contracted services there are normally for crushing activities. We did not have to crush this year because crushed material in 2023, because we had ample material already in the stockpile. But we are proposing to do some crushing in 2024. So you will see Wilson pit, the contracted services go up in 2024. We will see the contract services Larmer pit go down in 2024. In regard to the monitoring at the landfill, which it is closed, it was officially closed. I believe I was asked this question previously, but we carried a $5,000 amount, and we usually just carry that in case the ministry comes back with any what they call closing reports of any nature. And they normally will reach out at some point and normally say, has this been checked or has that been checked? And it's just a safeguard. If the funds are not used, they'll be rolled over and put back into the general reserve as per finance. So it is a safeguard. And I think it was a $5,000 number we have there for monitoring. So that's the background on those 3. I'm not sure, you had maybe 1 or 2 others.
Follow up?
Yes, through the chair. So the other 2 things I was touching on were the amount of calcium used and the phrase crushed asphalt. I'm not sure where we use that. I'm not sure if that's referring to the hot patch we used for the potholes or not.
So again, through Mr. Mayor, Councillor Byrne, item 1, the hot patch or cold patch, as we call it, that is the material used for potholes. So that is a material that fluctuates. The price has gone up significantly, but we are having our share of potholes because of the weather conditions. So we are, there is a sort of an extraordinary large demand on coal mix, as we call it. In regard to the calcium is a little bit dependent on weather conditions. I think you'll find in 2023, we had some wet season. So, and we do not have a large amount of gravel roads, but we do still have gravel roads. So the calcium is to keep dust down, as you noted. It is an application that we'll do when we're graveling, and it is used there. For the last 1 or 2 years, we've been under the amount that we've usually used because the weather conditions have dictated we didn't need it. But it is something that fluctuates year to year, and of course, the price this year we believe is running with about a 5% increase.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hancock. So we've transitioned out of the capital now. So we're going to, if people have operating questions, we're just going to keep rolling in that regard, just so everyone's clear. Ms. Hurley, you'd like to speak to the previous question?
No, through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may ask, if any members of council are asking a question, if you could just relay the department and the page number that you're speaking to, then we can certainly take a look at the GL just to ensure that we're all on the same page so that each of us can take a look at that. Thank you.
Good suggestion. Thank you for that. Questions with regards to operating, we can go through. Let it rip. Any further questions with regards to the operating? No, from Councillor Edgerton, did you have a question? No? Okay. Councillor Byrne, I think you alluded to a few questions, so floor is yours if you'd like it. Operating still, but we've finished the capital now. Yep, so operating questions, go for it. Well, while we give you a second to collect your thoughts, the one department we haven't done yet, which is an insulated economy, is the water wastewater department. So maybe Ms. Pope, would you like to go through that? And then after that, we'll have full reign to operate. So I'll give you a few seconds to get those questions together. Ms. Pope, over to you with regards to water wastewater.
Absolutely. So thank you for pulling that up. We have the capital request before you here. As a reminder, this does not affect the tax rate. These expenditures are included in the 5-year study for the user fees, which sets the rate. Therefore, these budgets come in line with the user fee and doesn't have anything to do with the residential tax rate. But that being said, we have capital requested items. There's a water, and then if you just scroll down a tiny bit there, there's a wastewater component as well, all funded through the user fees. And then, of course, the operating budget included herein. If there's any questions of council, our Public Works Director is here to answer those questions.
So the one significant change from first draft to second draft is that it appears as though the standpipe, there's going to be a structural study done to see if it can continue on in its existing life as some sort of tourist attraction, but just to make sure that the structure itself is physically sound and might be able to provide appropriate uses moving forward. So there's no forecasted in this capital budget any cost of removal or demolition or anything like that. The study is to look into the structural sanctity of the structure as it is now. Is that correct, Mr. Hancock?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. There's $20,000 identified for that study. And we may remember that we're still dealing with the revenue generating intent on top of it. So we still have that in place, and we haven't dealt with with Rogers on that yet. So at this time it's still in place and still generating revenue for the municipality.
And so at the conclusion of that review, then there'll be a report to council, probably later half of the year in 2024 is the end, because it's not a transfer to reserve. It's a project that's moving forward. So we'll expect that report to come back with the findings to council at a later date, and then we can make future decisions for the budget, probably 2025 with regards to the structure. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, on that note, I've yet to find anywhere in any of the documentation a revenue stream coming from those antennas. Where would that show up in the finances?
Ms. Pope, would you like to indicate that, please?
Thank you. Through the chair to all of council, if you turn to your water wastewater budget for operating, and if you look at page 1 of 7, the very first department indicates a rent. It's approximately $10,000 a year, and it's recorded there. In 2023, we've recorded $10,175.28 as the actual, but we budget annually approximately $10,000.
Just for clarity, so that's the second line under the water wastewater administration revenue when you see it there? Just so council's all aware and we're all on the same page, literally. That was for you, clerk, but okay, fine. Deputy Mayor Huntley, question.
Through you, Chair, to yes, Mr. Hancock. All the capital projects that are identified, are these all in-year projects, or are there some that you're collecting for future years? It's hard to tell which ones are actually on your slate for this year.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, the projects identified here, I'll note the servicing study is a completion of a study that's been ongoing for a period of time, which you're aware of. the projects here that are identified are to be completed in 2024.
Councillor Edgerton, question?
To you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Hancock there. I do believe that a meeting or so back, you gave a report on a study that was done on that tower. So why are we doing another study on it? I think you give us a report on one study. And the second thing I have here, while I got the mic open, I see in here you have down for a radio license $1,000, but $1,000 wasn't spent last year, so why we got $1,000 back in it again?
So Mr. Mayor, through to you, to Councillor Edgerton, I believe the first question was related to the study on the standpipe. And I believe at one point we identified removing the standpipe. We had a large number in there of $250,000. There was some discussion at council in regard to whether or not the standpipe could stay. I think there was a question about it being reused. We said it's not, it's been commented in the RVA report that said it would not be used for water storage and was not high enough for the future development of the community going north. The issue of the structure was, could it be used for something else? And it was a request of council to look at whether there's other uses for that tower. Is there something that might be more of a I should say entertainment, that's not quite the right term I'm looking for, but it was of a more casual use. Is there something else the tower could be used for? So we've identified $20,000 to do the structural review, which is really just to verify the integrity of the tower, because it is a concrete tower encased in steel. So we wanted to have a look at that. Number two, we've talked, I think you and myself have talked about the parking and the issue of the driveway access. So while we have the Rogers antenna on it and we've not dealt with the lease on that, we had agreed, or we are proposing in this budget that we do that we do that structural review and we come back to council with a report. That's the intent of the existing standpipe. So I'm not sure. The second question was, is that an operating? Operating. It's in the operating.
It's page 1. I took your mic, Wayne. Sorry, you got to push the button again. Sorry.
So again, to Mr. Mayor, Councillor Edgerton, we have identified radio licensing is identified at $1,000 in it is the licensing of the I was going to suggest of the water metering system that we have. It's talking about the licensing of our water metering system, which is for the reading of the meters. So it's not related to licensing as you would with two-way radios. So it's a licensing related to the remote reading of the water meters. That licensing is, I think it's quoted in 2022 at $800 and some, and it's not showing in 2023 yet, but will be. And it is something we carry into 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock, for that. So just for clarification, so the study with regards to RVA was only with regards to its ability to contribute to water wastewater servicing, which they said it is not. And so there wasn't actually a structural review done. It was more of a network or infrastructure contribution capability, which it did not have. So anyways, thanks for that clarification. Other questions with regards to water wastewater? Seeing none, we can then close the book and go back to, we can go back to operating. Yeah, okay, so that's the intention. So we're going to close the book and head back to operating questions. Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, I'm trying to understand the numbering system for the vehicles we have on the road for the roads department, and trying to understand, I get the idea of having data monitoring on the plow trucks and that. Some of the pickup trucks, I'm wondering, if that cost is necessary or not? And just, is the second set of digits supposed to represent the year they were purchased?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Byrne, the numbering system, yeah, does reflect the year they were purchased or the year of the vehicle. So for example, when you look at a tandem truck that has 14-18, the year of the vehicle is a 2018. In regard to the patrol system and GPS, we had set it up on the plow trucks primarily to deal with resident complaints and that type of idea. It was liability. It was to monitor whether the trucks had been in the area before or after where they were on their route. So the idea was when we received a complaint, we could tell the resident where we were or whether we had been there recently. In regard to the half-ton trucks, we monitor those because they do the patrol and we have them on those trucks. So we want to understand if the roads are patrolled, it's a liability issue and does tell that we do have a complete patrol. And again, if we do have a complaint about an icy road, we could say the patrol truck was there. So it gives us that second look at things from the overall, same as the tandems.
Follow-up question?
Through the chair, and this may be the wrong time, but we're still a shorthanded one driver, I guess, for our plow trucks right now. Is that any real impact to the winter, the way we're set up? And I understand that there's some applications out for that position.
To Mr. Mayor to Councilor Byrne, yeah, we are short one full-time operator. One of our operators has moved on to another job, and we are actually going to fill that position as quickly as possible. We are interviewing actually next week for that position. I think the way staff have handled it, and they've done, there's two things working for us. We haven't had as harsh a winter as we normally would have. That's number one. Number two, I think staff kind of move around just to try to cover off where they're missing the person. So I think they've done a good job on that. We are finding we're a little slower on the sidewalks, but I mean, that's to be expected a little bit because we only have one person trying to do both the downtown area and the new subdivision. But generally, staff have done a good job to date handling it, even being short-manned.
Thanks for that, Mr. Hancock. Other questions with regards to the operating budget? Nope, no questions? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I believe we've gone through the majority of the budget. But we now are talking about directions. We do have our special budget tonight, which I know Ms. Pope has already talked about a couple different things that will be amended. By my calculation, Ms. Pope, we are currently with the reduction of the $23,300 that's proposed. The levy from 3.9 is down to 3.601, so 3.6 and change. And there's a number of components that, obviously we never really know what we'll know between now and February when we get the final draft budget, but there will be some obviously changes, but we also have additional opportunities where to go with regards to the direction that we're seeking for tonight. So the direction would be that Ms. Pope take on the changes that have been adjusted in the meeting this far and come back with the revised report for this evening. Is that sufficient direction? Looking at the clerk, I'm looking at this page. Okay, so then that is the direction then that Ms. Pope make the amendments discussed here today and come back for the public portion of the special budget meeting tonight. Look for move. Oh, Councilor Byrne, question?
I apologize through the chair. So in Parks and Recreation, I was going to ask if I could. I notice some of the facilities, we charge ourselves, I guess, property tax. Other ones we don't. I don't see any notice anywhere about whether we pay property tax on this building or the new building next door. I just wonder how all that works out, that who covers what.
Ms. Pope?
Most municipal facilities are exempt. We go through a process of ensuring that they're registered that way. If there are any revenue generating capacities, that does sometimes not make us eligible for a full exemption. So we have partial, where we have to pay certain components. A good example would be underwater wastewater. There were some rules and some changes before we brought in the MPEB PUG program through council because those facilities now, they were actually taxed and it's outside of our control. So there is a bit of a mix, but in general, municipal buildings such as the municipal office, primarily for, it's not revenue generator and it's primarily for municipal purposes and that kind of a thing. It's fully exempt, but I could look at a particular line item if you want to come and let me know which one you're looking at and which one to look into further. We can go line by line because that's not in the public agenda, but definitely in the detailed pages that all of council receives that we could look through.
Thank you, through you, Chair. No, it was just more of a general concept on how it's worked. So the fact that we have a solar panel out the back here and we have a standpipe out the back here, the solar panel's supposed to make money, hasn't. The standpipe does make money. That doesn't conflict with that concept. It's
not a revenue generator that way. There's actually, pardon me, but it's iFit, or what was the name of that program for the solar units? Microfit, thank you. You're drawing back on many years ago, Microfit, and that was technically an agreement for the setup of the solar. It's not really a revenue generator. So like I said, there are certain components we don't control. The aspects that make us eligible, we just make sure that we report in what we use it for, and then it determines what the CVA value is and which tax class is appropriate. I think that answers that question.
So depending on the asset and the utilization of the asset and the purpose of the asset, there's legislative requirements that require the municipality to incur a certain amount of taxation depending on which kind of issue you're dealing with. Okay. So it's not exclusively revenue generating, it's regardless of whatever, it could be anything, but whatever they deem appropriate, we have to reflect that in our finances. Okay, thanks for that. That's very helpful for clarity. Last but not least, is there any other operational questions before we move forward? I just want to, Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. I hope this is the right time. I was looking on the planning and economical development for the 12-month ending, page 1 of 4. I'm just trying to figure out when it comes to gross wages full-time and gross wages contracted, the reasoning for the, like, we over budgeted in 23 compared to our actuals. And now we're jumping higher. I'm just trying to figure out where those costs are going to be generated to require that much of a budget increase.
Thank you. Sorry, we're just speaking on page 1 of 4 under planning and ACD. Okay, and we're dealing with economic development or we're dealing with planning? Planning? When for clarification, so we budget based on an estimate for the upcoming year, usually with the current staff that we have and the indexing of the wage grid and what we think is going to happen. As the year unfolds, sometimes there's a contract instead of full-time or what have you. So what actually occurs? So if you add the actuals together of the 224 and the 40,000, you'll see that the 301 on the left-hand side that was budgeted, there wasn't a line underneath, but it's because it's the accumulation of the two of them. If the two were added together, as far as staffing, I have to go back and look at who in the staff register is listed here. This is where the wages go. We don't speak about that publicly, but I can give further clarification on operations.
But there's also, if I'm not mistaken, there's also a vacancy in the planning department as well that would be budgeted for but not accumulated. Is that correct?
We just recently filled that vacancy, but yes.
Excuse me. Because there was a vacancy for a period of the year, that's resulted in not incurring the budgeted expenses. And then after that, you also, now that has been filled, you'll start incurring those expenses plus the addition of the adjustment for the COLI as well. So that's part of the explanation as well. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that. I don't, well, we discussed the motion. The motion was just that Ms. Pope take on the adjustments made by council today and bring it back for the public budget meeting this evening with the revised levy impact, if I'm not mistaken. So that's where we stand right now. Ms. Page?
Just for clarification to Ms. Pope, do we also need that council receive the second draft 2024 budget presentation for information and then that they direct us? Okay, so the two-parter, that's all just for clarification.
So the first being the motion to receive the the second draft budget report for information. And then the second portion of that motion being that Ms. Pope make the adjustments made or moved by council this afternoon in preparation for the special budget meeting this evening. Two-parter, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Now it's back to my job, the confirming bylaw being bylaw number 2024-05, being a bylaw to confirm the proceeding of the special meeting held January 25th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Be moved a first, second, and be read a first, second, and third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councillor Edgerton and Councillor Natchoff, all in favor. That is approved. Lastly, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Natchoff and Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. We'll see everyone this evening at 6 p.m.